Who's Marcus Grey? Artorius' question was quiet. Monson kept his eyes on the screen. The words came so low, he was almost mouthing them.
Marcus Grey is my grandfather.
Monson did his best to keep the emotion out of his voice.
Casey, click on that link.
Casey's apprehension came through clearly as he spoke.
Grey, are you sure that's a good idea?
Monson considered the question.
Yeah, I think it's something that needs to be done.
He smiled.
Besides, it's on the internet. I'll probably hear about it anyway. Might as well get it from the source.
Casey clicked the link, albeit reluctantly. The fiber optic connection picked up the feed, loading a second browser tab and a video player. The video started after a brief few seconds. Words faded in from the black background on the player. Gossip Guy presents. The screen changed and new words appeared. Marcus Grey and the horror of Barty Bridge. An anchor person sat coolly behind the desk of a massive newsroom. To his utter horror, Monson instantly recognized the person sitting calmly in the news chair.
Derek Dayton?
Monson thought. The camera zoomed in sharply on Derek. A furious, blazing expression stood affixed to Derek's face. He smiled devilishly.
The one responsible for the attack on Barty Bridge is none other than Marcus Grey.
Monson cringed as anger and shock started to bubble in his gut. Artorius and Casey's collective concern fell upon him. He did his best to remain passive.
Morning, Collin, and welcome to Corrin's All Access.
The rest of Derek's words fell prey to Monson's strengthening voice.
What's Corrin's All Access?
Casey chuckled slightly, though it sounded forced.
Grey, I swear, you purposely remain ignorant sometimes.
Actually, it's not surprising, Casey. Grey doesn't have the same floor responsibilities that we do. Artorius addressed Monson. The All Access is a news channel that plays on each floor every morning. The channel has been in place for a couple of years. Derek is the anchorman and president of the club that runs the station. Most people don't pay much attention to it and consider it kind of a joke. Derek's sultry voice drew their attention. They turned back towards the monitor.
Our special topic is a sad and tragic one. A story that breaks the heart of a nation and her citizens as it affects them in the most brutal of manners. This story is one of righteous anger directed at those who dare call themselves human for causing this horrific event.
A flinty glint made its way into Derek's eyes as he paused, probably intending to cool the simmering tension. He continued his oration.
I'm Derek Dayton, and this is a Corrin University All Access News Network exclusive report on the horror of Barty Bridge.
Music started to play as a parade of credits played across the web player. When the image paused, everyone looked down at Casey.
You paused the player.
Monson's voice sounded hollow in his throat.
Why?
Casey moved apprehensively, playing with the mouse in his hand.
You sure you want to do this? We don't have to. I know.
Monson ran an unsure hand through his hair.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Casey nodded and unpaused the player. Lines of moving credits scrolled quickly, then Derek started speaking again. Different images flashed in the upper right-hand corner as he did.
May 7th, 2012 was supposed to be an epic day in the history of North America and the world. It was the day that the Artificial Inland Project was to go live, changing the world for the better. The Artificial Inland Project was to be a newly created landmass. Yes, that's right. A newly created landmass that was stabilized off the coast of the western United States. Using classified technology, the inland chain, consisting of more than 10 islands, was literally raised from the depths of the ocean, giving the people of the world a new outlet for life and discovery. These islands, and the technology that created them, was the culmination of billions of dollars from the American and Canadian governments and private industries. It was to be the new center for the Canadian-American Coastal Power Station, providing a home for the first and only cold fusion reactor on the planet. Disney Universe, the new $100 billion park, contained the biggest shopping area in the world, boasting 27 new full-size attractions, including nearly 1,000 restaurants, several hundred hotels, and 7 PGA-designed golf courses. Housing, from the humble to the extravagant, was planned to accommodate a wide span of socioeconomic groups, thus creating new and exciting opportunities for the ambitious. Fueled by the cold fusion reactor, the construction of the Trans-Pacific Bulletway was to connect Asia and America like never before, allowing Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Filipino, and the other Asian populations access to the growing artificial inland community. This vision of tomorrow, this hope for the future, this radical departure from accepted norms, from its conceptualization to ratification, was the brainchild of a single individual, Christopher Barity.
Derek's voice drifted out of the speakers, permeating Monson's mind. Each word found its mark in his head. It was as if each of them formed a key to a dormant and forgotten door. Now, with these doors unlocked, the flood of images and emotions were gripping his very core, his very self.
The bridge, or highway that would connect the artificial inland project to the mainland, was a gift from the state governments of Washington, Oregon, and California as a gesture towards Barity and his conglomerate. The bridge, consisting of 3 parts adjoining Highway 101 as it ran along the coastline of California, Oregon, and Washington, was a 10-year, multi-billion-dollar project. Its design would allow interstate commuters the benefits of expedited travel and the opportunity to use the most advanced electromagnetic train in the world. Thousands of people littered the platforms along the track that day in May, only to be extinguished in tragedy.
Derek moved, cocking his head to the left as if he were pointing towards the picture on the right-hand side of the screen. The picture grew sharply, taking over the entire player. It depicted the aerial view of a massive 8-lane, 4-branch roundabout, glistening in the glare of water-reflected light. The word before sat superimposed at the bottom left of the image. The picture faded out as a second image seemed to force its way onto the screen. This shot was exactly the same as the previous one, minus 2 striking differences. The first being, the word before was gone, replaced with a darker version of the word after, and the second, and much more breathtaking, was the obvious absence of the 8-lane roundabout. It was gone. The only remnants that remained were charred and jagged chunks of jutting concrete and steel, where the 4 branches used to be. Derek's voice started again.
The U.S. and Canadian government response was swift, as detachments from the U.S. Navy, Army, and Air Force, in addition to the Canadian Coast Guard, responded to Colonel Marchand Vanderbilt's distress call, who was already on the scene. This is footage from his initial contact with the media.
The video player changed once again, this time showing a haggard man in full army fatigues, attempting to move past reporters that he obviously found distasteful.
Colonel, what can you tell us?
What caused this? Is the country under attack?
I'm sorry, I have no comment.
The colonel attempted to part the gathering mob.
Is it true that the North Koreans are
What
involved?
about the Chinese?
How will this affect the artificial inland
Are
project?
other countries trying to steal the cold fusion technology?
The colonel stopped mid-stride, his back still to the reporters. He visibly tensed. Abruptly, he spun on his heel, surprising the reporters as he did so. Monson reached down to pause the player.
Why would he answer them?
The others' expressions seemed frazzled, as if they did not know what he was talking about. Brian recovered first.
China. What about China? That is probably why he chose to answer. He did not want the media to instigate calling for war with China. But why would people...
Brian put up a hand.
Tensions in that particular area of foreign policy have been strained for a while now, The relationship between our two countries are just now settling back to normal, semi-cordial terms.
Brian pointed back to the screen.
If I were to venture a guess, the Colonel probably thought it would be expedient to dissolve any misconception of Chinese involvement to prevent any more rescission of diplomacy. I guess that makes sense.
Monson scratched at his head.
Kind of.
Casey unpaused the player, and it flared back to life as the Colonel responded to the reporters.
Look, evidence is scarce, but up to this point, there isn't any indication that the North Koreans or Chinese would have anything to do with this.
The reporters started to clamor over each other.
Then who would it be? Iran?
How can you rule out China and North Korea so quickly? The Colonel put up a hand.
The technology involved is far beyond anything we've encountered. Literally years ahead of even the theoretical platform. China and North Korea don't have this type of capability.
An attractive woman with short blonde hair elbowed her way to the front of the pack of reporters.
Then what are we dealing with? Who's responsible for this devastating attack?
The Colonel shook his head.
We're looking into all possible explanations, but whoever it is, they are not people that we are currently equipped to deal with.
At this, the Colonel's face changed dramatically, and he put up his hand to indicate he was accepting no further questions. Monson stared at the Colonel's expression. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as he voiced his thought.
He didn't really intend to mention that last statement, did he? A slip of the tongue if I've ever seen one. It is a good thing that he is such a high-ranking officer, or he might have lacked the experience not to say more.
The others nodded their agreement. The Colonel's voice reflected his inwardly directed anger as he parted the crowd.
I'm sorry. That's all I can say right now. Excuse me.
The video cut back to Derek.
The aftermath of the Colonel's responses created a scene of panic and fear that hasn't been seen since 9/11, as information was released detailing that hundreds of people had been killed and many more injured.
A new video flared to life showing medical crews attending to the wounded. Medics treated small children for burns while trying to remove a glowing, viscous substance that resembled reddish, flameless napalm. Dozens of people lay groaning in pain with strangely constructed knives perforating their bodies. Added panic arose as the strange knives melted away, even as they were being removed, causing some sort of acid damage to both medics and victims. This recording was of a much lesser quality than the previous video clips, as the colors of certain parts of the video blurred back and forth between their true nature and grainy smudges, distorting the puddles of dark red that covered the ground. Derek's voice went very quiet, speaking even as the screen cut back to him.
Now, almost 6 months later, the same questions are plaguing the American people. What happened that afternoon in May? Who was responsible? And why did they do it?
Derek turned, looking at a different camera.
The American people, and the world, are searching for answers to these difficult questions. They have been since that dreadful day. The question that remains, however, is will they get them? That is where the special Senate report attempted to fill in the gaps.
The player again changed, folding into another video, this one of a man at a podium, giving some sort of a report.
Members of the press, while it's an honor to stand before you today, I am disheartened that it has to be in such circumstances. My name is Special Agent Devin Maverick of the Barty Bridge Special Investigation Squad.
The man's demeanor adjusted ever so slightly, becoming more businesslike.
As directed by the Joint Subcommittee of the House and Senate, I am here to finish the report of events of the Barty Bridge disaster. To date, you have heard the reports regarding the latter 3 hours, or respectively, Hour 3, Hour 4, and Hour 5. In the next half an hour, I'm going to attempt to relay what little we know of Hour 1 and Hour 2. An update to the report was just recently...
The special agent's voice faded, and Derek began again.
The report that Special Agent Maverick referred to is a 2,000-page document that details all available information on the 5 hours of the horror experienced on Barty Bridge.
The screen flashed a typewritten document, highlighting some of the wording.
In it,
The pages of the document changed.
the investigation unit details the most plausible course of events from the start of the disaster until the complete sweep of the area finished 5 hours later.
Monson started to get angry.
Get on with it, Derek, he thought. What is this huge piece of information you have?
Monson did his best to stay focused, to concentrate on Derek's voice. However, he was finding it difficult, as he found that memories were permeating his foggy haze.
He leaned against a cement wall as salty wind nipped at his senses of touch and smell. The squawk of odd white birds in the distance grated on his nerves as irritation and fear burrowed its way into his nethermost regions. The gentle pressure of a reassuring hand squeezed his shoulder.
A dual sense of awareness allowed Monson to hear and see his waking dreams, but also allowed Derek's dribbling voice to waft through his mind.
Corn All Access has a special release for you that may shed some light on those ever-elusive hours.
Another video jumped to life, depicting the unmistakable landmarks of Barity's roundabout. There was no sound, only the rough images of a security camera showing a black and white feed played. People mulled in and around folding chairs, talking in small groups. Many were posturing wildly, laughing in throaty yet refined manners. It was obvious that everyone was having a good time.
Women in finely cut dresses smiled seductively, looking him up and down as he maneuvered among them. He cleared their attempts easily, but cursed his luck when a gruff man with overlarge hands stopped him to bellow some sort of admonishment and approval. The man's face was familiar but unimportant. He had to move on. He had to continue searching.
As you can see, Derek's voice came from off-screen.
This is an elusive piece of security footage recorded on the day of the attack, found in the wreckage of Barity's roundabout.
The video scene changed dramatically as streaks of light hit a group of people congregated closer to the camera. When the light cleared, they had vanished, though black puddles of thick liquid pooled ominously where they had been standing. There was not time to comprehend what effect the light had on the missing people, as directly after it, panic ensued. Black-suited commandos pushed onto the scene with massive science fiction-like weapons. The commandos herded the people, gathering them towards the very center of the rows of chairs. They swept the chairs away as if the very wind itself found the chairs somehow offensive. People cowered underneath the commandos as they moved. Once situated, the lines of commandos retreated a few steps, weapons pointing at the rows of shocked and fearful captives. The commandos gestured aggressively, and though again no sound could be heard, their intention was clear. Move, and we'll kill you. Suddenly, their formation staggered slightly when a single individual stood up from amongst the herd of people. He stared at the soldiers, his full-length cloak billowing in the wind.
Falling globs of fire, blades of compacted wind, shafts of molten metal, spears of crystallized water rained down, all stopped, swept away.
The man removed his cloak, rotating casually in front of the commandos. His intention was clear. It looked like he was saying, "I have no weapons. I am unarmed. Will you hear? Will you listen to my voice?" The commandos relaxed at this action, pointing weapons lazily at the man, displaying their haughtiness and disrespect. These actions were ill-conceived, however, as one of the soldiers shouted angrily at his comrades, gesturing wildly at the man standing calmly in front of them. The soldier spoke for a moment more. The commandos' posture sharply altered in response. They became alert and focused, but also nervous. Very nervous. So nervous, their weapons were noticeably shaking. A commotion at the rear of the commandos caused them to slowly part. A second individual, also wearing a cloak, stepped forward, facing the first man in the crowd of upper-class individuals.
The acrid smell overwhelmed him. Burnt flesh, the metallic tinge of blood, bodies. He wanted to stop, to fall. He was so tired and weak, but he wanted to stop him more. He wanted to fight. He could not stop him. He was not strong enough. The foe was too strong, too cruel.
The two men spoke at length, gesturing at the people and commandos. The first man folded his hands serenely, apparently trying to pacify the second cloaked man. Without warning, the cloaked man stepped forward, placing a hand on the first. He appeared to whisper in his ear, then pointed towards the crowd and gestured to the surroundings. They continued to speak to one another, their movements reflecting the seriousness of their conversation. Finally, the first man nodded his head reluctantly. The cloaked man about-faced and stepped forward buoyantly, while the first man followed, moving slowly through the still-parted commandos. The commandos shrank back as he neared, still pointing shaking weapons at him. As he reached the front of the still nervous commandos, the cloaked man pointed within the midst of the cowering crowd. Except for the twisting of heads and the unsure looks given to friends and lovers, no one moved. The man continued to speak. Confusion suddenly entered the minds of the boys and Brian as a dramatic and unexpected blurring of the video feed skewed across the screen. When the picture came back into focus, the cloaked man was pointing an undistinguishable object towards the crowd of people. The cloaked man swung the shimmery object, pointing it downward and to the front of his hostages. He reached towards the crowd. Derek's voice cut in as the video image froze.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is not for the faint of heart. If there are children in the room, please have them leave.
Casey rolled his eyes.
Moron.
The video sprang back to life. Monson, Casey, Artorius, Brian, and anyone else watching gasped in horror as the cloaked man grabbed a young girl no older than 15 from the crowd of people. A woman, presumably her mother, fastened herself to the child, and though her protest was silent in the video feed, it echoed her pleading calls to all those who watched. The cloaked man struck the woman with the hand holding his shimmering object. Visible liquid sprayed from the woman's face as she tumbled to the ground. She did not get up. The cloaked man brought the young woman into his arms, holding the still shimmering object to her throat. His arms started to move. All at once, several things happened in quick succession. First, at the corner of the screen, a person jumped from the middle of the hostages. He moved with blinding speed towards the cloaked man holding the girl. The people in his way did not faze him either. They grazed off his stride like an invisible bulldozer had thrust them aside. From among the confused commandos, a literal whirlwind appeared, tossing people, chairs, and weapons in every direction away from the cloaked man. The first man stood, distinguished sharply amongst the churning air. He stepped forward towards the cloaked man. The last scene played in slow motion before the video went black. The three boys and Brian stared on as the cloaked man brought his arm sharply across the young girl's throat. Casey hit the pause button before Derek could start talking again. Words did not come easily. Of course they did not. What could you say to something like that? Those events were out of a dream. No, that was no dream. That could not be merely a dream. Dream was too kind of a word. It was a nightmare. That scene was a living nightmare. Casey spoke first, finally ending the lengthening silence.
How's it possible that this is just coming up now?
Brian replied softly.
I may be mistaken, but I believe that this is the area of the bridge that was almost completely destroyed. The roundabout.
He gestured with his hands, forming a circle.
"Is where this ceremony was taking place, and I dare say that it was obliterated and sank into the ocean within a half an hour of this very recording. That fact may have delayed the recording's publication."
Artorius asked the question that came to everyone's mind.
If that's true, Brian, and this is a recording of those first 15 minutes and not some outrageous knockoff, then how did Derek get a hold of it? Shouldn't this be on the bottom of the ocean with everything else?
A dull numbness settled over the room as they realized the seriousness of the situation and the discussion involved. So many people died that day, and only just now were people starting to pick themselves up. This video brought about new questions and new possibilities. Unfortunately, these new possibilities also reopened the wounds that had still not finished healing. The release of this video was like going through a very painful surgery and a lengthy recovery process to remedy some timely and persistent infirmity. At the time of the surgery and the immediate resulting recovery, pain is prevalent and long-lasting, but there is a glimmer of hope that your strength will improve.
"That's not a question we can answer, Arthur."
Casey spoke quietly, shaking his head.
"I suppose we could try and beat it out of Derek."
Casey threw his arms up around his head. He continued his thought.
"I mean, he is due for a good beating."
Casey's flighty smile told Monson that he was only half serious.
Grey.
Artorius' voice sounded concerned.
Are you okay?
Monson answered in the affirmative.
"Yeah, I think I'm all right. That was just unexpected."
Monson wanted to tell Artorius, Brian, and Casey, now more than ever, his own confusing and conflicted history. But likewise, now more than ever, he knew he could not. These new memories, like so much of his recent events, did not make any sense. He and his grandfather were rubbing elbows with the high society types, attending that gathering as if it were the most natural thing to do. How did they get in? More importantly, what possible reason could they have had for being there in the first place? Monson pushed those thoughts away. He changed his focus. He closed his eyes, starting to dive deeper into his feelings. He shuddered as he did so. He could still feel the subdued nag of the aftershock. During those horrific events, apprehension, fear even, had encircled his entire being. What was of such concern? Had he known? Did he know what was about to transpire? Had he been involved? Monson shook his head at the thought. That was outrageous. How arrogant could he be? He was 14 years old. There was no reason for him to be involved. None whatsoever. Unexpected. Casey's one word reflected Monson's own weariness. That's another one of those understatements of the year. I think you're up to 2 now, Grey. You'd better slow down.
Can't be helped.
Monson played along with Casey's banter.
My implacable wit constrains me.
Your implacable wit constrains you? Artorius' face scrunched, his mouth chewing up the statement. You've been hanging out with Brian too much, Grey. You're starting to talk like him. Brian interjected.
You speak as if that were a bad thing.
Artorius' face reflected the truth of Brian's own statement. Brian laughed as only he could, in his kind way, but when he finally spoke, he addressed Monson.
Master Grey.
His voice took on a serious yet strangely inquisitive tone.
Yeah, Brian. This is the first you've heard of these happenings, is it not?
Monson's hand found its way to the back of his neck.
Yeah.
Brian's gaze morphed, becoming fatherly as he scrutinized Monson. It reminded Monson of Mr. Gatt.
Is there anything you would like to discuss? I can imagine that this is all very troubling to you.
Monson struggled to find the words. He wanted to discuss all of it. He really did.
He just did not know where to start. Everything was so muddled. He finally settled on, I do want to discuss everything.
Brian, Casey, and Artorius watched him in silence, breaths held in anticipation.
But I think I need some time.
Casey spoke up.
Usually, I would be complaining right now.
Artorius cut in.
I think the word you're looking for is whining.
Shut up, Arthur.
Just trying to help, keeping it real.
He put his fingers together, forming a shape of a W with them. Monson chuckled.
Arthur, I was under the impression that wasn't cool anymore.
Artorius' face sagged in defeat, though it was obvious that he was trying to control his amusement.
Casey scowled. Anyway, I know that I'm simply going to have to add this to the list of things that Monson Grey needs to explain, but this once, I agree with him.
Artorius spoke up.
Shall we reconvene then? All in favor? Say aye.
Artorius raised his hand as he spoke. Monson and Casey lapsed into much-needed laughter.
Aye.
The conversation melted into mundane things from that point, which all, even Brian, took up with enthusiasm. There were things to ponder, questions and answers to be sought after, but right now, they needed the average in every day, and that is what they stuck to. They took their conversation to the sitting room, where Brian made the boys something he called a smoothie. The boys did their best to choke down the drink, which tasted like vegetable-flavored chalk. Despite this conversation, Monson knew that they were ignoring something very important. The video. It was not over. They still did not know what involvement his grandfather had in the events on Barty Bridge. Derek had something sinister up his sleeve. Monson just knew it. Maybe this was the reason he was trying to avoid the rest of the video. Maybe he really did not want to learn his grandfather's connection to Barty Bridge.
Movie time,
Casey called, clapping his hands together.
Movie time?
Monson looked at the clock.
Case, are you sure that's a good idea? It's getting pretty late.
Stop being such a sissy, Grey.
Casey pulled a DVD from his bag.
We're on a very strict movie viewing schedule, and you're already behind, dude.
I call the armchair.
Artorius ran over to the seat and tossed himself into it.
By the way, what movie are we on? I need to get into the mindset.
Casey's voice took on a presenter's tone.
This evening, our feature presentation will be...
Casey glanced at Artorius.
Drum roll, please.
Artorius sat up from his reclined position and started tapping on the coffee table.
The Long Kiss Goodnight.
Casey threw out his hands as if to say, ta-da!
Never heard of it.
Artorius and Monson spoke in unison. Casey's face contorted, changing from overwhelming joy to underwhelming contrition.
You guys suck. Seriously.
He shook his head.
It doesn't matter. You're gonna love it. I promise.
"45 minutes later, Monson was at the edge of his seat. Moving beyond the fact that angry women were hot, and that Monson May had found his first love in Gina Davis, the movie's plotline had a great deal of similarity to his own life. The main character had lost her memory and was beleaguered by bad dreams and unexplainable skills. Even more than that was the presence of something else in the main character's psyche, something evil. The thought process forced him into a reflective state, the very state he had been trying to avoid since he sat down to watch the movie. All the recent events pressed heavily on his mind, though, to his surprise, it was Cyan that jumped to the forefront. What would she think of all this? The bridge, the two men, and his connection to them. Would she be happy? No, Cyan was never happy. Interested? Curious? Satisfied? He let out a deep breath as he rubbed his knuckles absent-mindedly. Monson's cell phone rang from within his bedroom.
That's odd, he thought. Who would be calling me? Taurus usually sends me a text, and Artorius and Casey are right here.
Hey, Case, will you pause the movie for me? Monson said aloud. Sure thing, Gray. Just hurry up. I want to finish this. Monson stood up, stretching his legs. Then dashing to his room, he grabbed his phone, not even looking at the incoming number.
Hello?
Monson, honey?
Molly!
Monson felt a foolish grin cover his face.
How are you?
I'm good, sweetie. How are you?
Her voice sounded forced. He paused at this answer. That did not sound like Molly at all. A commotion from the other room caused Monson to shut his door. He walked to his window seat, placing himself in the exact middle of the cushion.
Idiots,
he thought, adjusting to find a comfortable position.
Can't you fools sit quietly for a few minutes?
Monson?
He returned his attention to his phone.
Oh, sorry about that, Molly. Artorius and Casey are making a ruckus. Anyway,
Monson ran a hand through his hair.
Why do you sound so forlorn? You sound like someone killed your cat.
Molly chuckled.
Well, we know that's not true. I don't even have a cat.
Monson rolled his eyes, suddenly glad that she could not see him.
I know that, Molly. It's just...
And don't roll your eyes at me.
Monson spoke softly in return.
What did you say?
The phone was dead. He pulled it from his ear and stared at it confused.
I said, don't roll your eyes at me.
Monson slowly raised his chin. Molly was standing in his bedroom doorway.
You've been listening to the podcast-only novel of The House of Grey by Collin Earl. For more news, information, and updates, please visit houseofgreybook.com. Music by Figure of Fiends. Visit the band at myspace.com/Figure of Fiends. Cover art for The House of Grey provided by James Thane. More information at thayn.net.